Aquarius, pause for a moment. Before January 12 arrives, something has already shifted inside you. Not in your plans, not in your calendar, but in your body. That quiet pause you couldn't explain. The strange feeling that things were stuck, yet somehow not wrong. This isn't a warning. And it isn't a promise made to everyone. It's a moment of alignment. January 12 doesn't break your life open. It changes direction gently, precisely, and 5 blessings begin moving at the same time, not because you chased them, but because you finally stopped forcing what wasn't meant to move yet. If this already feels familiar, leave a water wave in the comments. That's how you say, I'm open to this message. And stay with me, because what's unfolding next explains why nothing was ever truly stuck and why this moment couldn't have come any sooner. There's something I want you to notice now. Not in the story, not in the sky, but in the way your chest feels as you're listening. Because long before anything changed, your body already knew. You may not have had words for it. It didn't arrive as a thought. It arrived as a pause. A moment where your energy didn't rush forward like it usually does. A quiet hesitation. As if part of you gently stepped off the moving walkway and said, just let me breathe for a second. That's not confusion. That's awareness waking up. Aquarius, you're known for living in your mind. For analyzing, observing, staying one step ahead of emotion so it doesn't slow you down. But recently something softened that strategy. You may have felt tired in a way sleep couldn't fix, or noticed your body asking for stillness even when nothing was technically wrong. Less desire to push, less tolerance for noise, more sensitivity to what feels off, and maybe you told yourself it was nothing, that you'd deal with it later. That logic would catch up eventually. But what if this time logic was late on purpose? Because intuition doesn't knock loudly. It whispers through sensation, through timing that feels slightly misaligned, through moments where you realize you don't want to keep proving how strong you are. Here's the quiet truth most people miss about you. You don't ignore your emotions because you don't feel deeply. You ignore them because you feel too deeply and learned early on how to survive by staying composed. But right now, something inside you has changed its rhythm. And instead of demanding answers, it's asking for honesty. What if that strange pause wasn't life slowing you down, but life protecting you from moving too fast? What if the stillness wasn't a delay, but a recalibration, so you wouldn't have to abandon yourself to keep going? You didn't imagine this shift, and you didn't cause it by overthinking. It came because your nervous system finally trusted you enough to tell the truth. That something old is loosening its grip, not dramatically, not painfully, just quietly stepping back. And if you're listening to this right now, let me say something gently, without urgency. You're not here because you're bored. And you're not here by accident. A deeper part of you already recognized this frequency. Already felt the door closing behind you even before you turned around. So let me ask you something, just between us. When was the last time you allowed yourself to pause without calling it failure? Because what's coming next doesn't ask you to become someone new. It simply asks you to stay present as the version of you that no longer fits the old weight. And as we keep moving forward together, you'll start to see why this subtle shift had to come first before anything else could move at all. And when that quiet knowing settles in, something else becomes clear. This moment you're standing in was never meant to shake your life apart. It was meant to realign it. January 12 doesn't arrive like a storm. It doesn't crash through your door or demand dramatic choices. It moves more like a slow shift beneath your feet. So subtle you almost miss it until you realize you're no longer standing where you used to be. That's how real change comes to you. Not through pressure, not through chaos, but through an inner truth that quietly refuses to stay silent. You see, Aquarius, you don't transform because someone pushes you. You don't respond well to force. You respond to resonance. The moment your inner world no longer matches the shape of your outer life, something inside you starts to turn, gently, decisively, without asking permission. And that's what makes this day different. Not because anything breaks, but because several invisible currents finally line up at once. You may feel it as clarity without urgency, a calm decision that surprises even you, an emotional exhale where there used to be tension. Not excitement exactly, but relief. Relief that you don't have to keep explaining yourself. Relief that you can stop staying in places that require you to dim your truth just to belong. What's happening now isn't about becoming someone new. It's about no longer pretending that the old arrangement still works. There's a quiet courage in that, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply stops participating in what feels misaligned. And here's something most people don't understand about you. Your changes are never impulsive. They happen after a long season of inner negotiation. After you've tried to adapt. after you've given things more chances than they deserved. So when the shift finally comes, it's not dramatic. It's clean. It feels like choosing not to carry a weight anymore and realizing your hands are already empty. Let me ask you something, softly. When was the last time you noticed how much energy it takes to stay somewhere that no longer reflects who you are? Because January 12 isn't opening a brand new chapter. It's simply closing the space where you've been standing out of habit rather than truth. And when that space closes, other things don't rush in. They align. Ideas, opportunities, connections, even rest. Not because you chased them, but because you finally stop resisting the turn. This is the moment where you realize you don't need to fight your way forward. You only need to stop standing where your spirit has already moved on. And as we keep going, you'll begin to notice how this quiet pivot creates room for things you thought were delayed to start finding you again, without effort, without force, right on time. And once that inner turning settles, there's often a thought that slips in quietly. A familiar one. The kind you don't always say out loud. The thought that maybe you've been stuck, not moving fast enough, not getting there on time, watching others pass milestones while your own path seems to pause again and again. But let me tell you something gently. Something your nervous system already knows. Even if your mind has been arguing with it, you were never stuck. You were being held. There's a difference, and it matters more than you realize. Because what looks like delay from the outside often feels very different from the inside. It feels like resistance, like doors that don't open when you expect them to, like timing that keeps missing your plans by just enough to make you question yourself. But Aquarius, you move ahead of the curve. You always have. Your ideas arrive early. Your awareness shifts before the world is ready to meet it. And when that happens, life doesn't rush you forward. It slows things down so you don't have to shrink yourself just to fit the moment. This isn't punishment, it's protection. Because had certain things arrived sooner, you would have had to compromise parts of yourself you were never meant to lose. You would have said yes when your soul wasn't ready. You would have adapted in ways that cost you your truth. And somewhere deep inside, you sensed that. Even on the days you were frustrated. Even when you wondered why it felt harder for you than for others. There is an intelligence to the pauses you've lived through. An unseen buffering system that absorbed impact so you didn't have to. You were not late. You were aligned with a timing that valued your integrity more than your speed. And here's where the softness comes in. The part I want you to hear as a friend. You don't need to keep blaming yourself for what didn't move. You don't need to replay old decisions asking what you should have done differently. You didn't miss anything that was truly meant to stay. What you experienced as delay was space being created around you. Space to grow without being watched. Space to become clearer without pressure. Space to mature into someone who no longer accepts half-aligned situations just to feel chosen. Let me ask you something, quietly. What if the reason you're still intact, still thoughtful, still able to feel deeply is because life refused to rush you into places that would have hardened you? Because now, something subtle has shifted. That protective layer begins to loosen. Not because danger is coming, but because you're strong enough to meet what's next without losing yourself. And as this realization settles, you may notice the self-criticism soften first. A little less tension in your chest. A little more trust in your own timing. This is the moment where you stop asking, what is wrong with me? And begin to sense, what was quietly working for me all along? And as we continue, you'll start to see how this protection was never about holding you back. It was about making sure that when movement returned, it would finally feel safe to receive it. And after that realization settles, something else begins to soften. Not your dreams, not your standards, but the tight grip you've been holding around survival. Money has a way of carrying emotion, especially for you. You don't just think about finances in numbers. You feel them in your body, in the way your shoulders tense, in the way your breath shortens when uncertainty lingers a little too long. And lately, there may have been a quiet pressure there, not panic, just a constant awareness, like something paused mid-inhale. But listen closely now. That pressure is starting to ease, not because everything has arrived, but because the flow has begun to move again. What you experienced as being stuck financially was never a reflection of your worth or intelligence. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't mismanagement. It was timing waiting for alignment. You see, Aquarius, money responds differently to you. It doesn't chase well. It resists being forced. The moment you try to pursue it out of fear, it tightens. But when you focus on what actually reflects your values, your originality, your way of seeing the world, that's when abundance finds its way back to you almost quietly. January 12 doesn't flip a switch in your bank account. It shifts something more subtle first. Your relationship with receiving. You may notice it as a calmer inner dialogue. A sense that you don't have to scramble. A feeling that things are being rearranged behind the scenes without you having to chase every detail. Sometimes the first sign isn't money itself. It's relief. A bill that doesn't feel as heavy. A conversation that goes smoother than expected. A delay that suddenly works in your favor instead of against you. And then, slowly, movement. A message you didn't expect. An old opportunity resurfacing with a different tone this time. A door you thought had closed quietly opening without effort. Let me ask you something gently. What if the reason money hasn't responded to pressure is because it was waiting for you to stop proving and start aligning? Because your true value was never meant to be squeezed into urgency or fear. You are at your most magnetic when you are grounded in what feels right. When your work carries meaning. When your choices don't betray your nervous system just to keep up. And that's what's shifting now. The pressure lifts before the results appear. This is how it works for you. The inner state changes first. Then the outer world catches up. So if you're noticing a small exhale where there used to be tension, pay attention. That's the sign. Not that everything is solved, but that the stream is moving again. And once it does, it rarely stops all at once. As we continue, you'll start to see how this renewed flow connects to something even more personal. Something that reaches beyond numbers and into the way you allow connection to meet you where you are now. And as that sense of relief begins to settle, something else starts to stir. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like a gentle awareness brushing the edges of your heart. You may not be able to name it yet, but there's a feeling of being noticed without being watched, remembered without being pulled. Somewhere, someone is thinking of you. Not in a way that disrupts your peace. In a way that feels quiet, intentional, almost respectful of your space. You don't feel invaded by it, you feel acknowledged. And that matters to you more than grand gestures ever could. Because you've never needed love to shout your name. You've needed it to understand your silences, to sit with you in the pauses without trying to fill them. For you, connection isn't about constant contact. It's about resonance. The kind that travels even when no words are exchanged. This awareness might arrive as a sudden memory, a familiar energy passing through your mind without warning, or a curiosity about someone you haven't met yet but somehow already recognize. It could be someone from your past seeing you differently now, noticing what they couldn't hold before. Or someone new observing, quietly taking their time because they sense you're not someone to rush. Or even a connection that hasn't taken form yet, one that exists first as intention, as alignment, as a gentle pull toward something meaningful. What's important is not who it is, it's how it feels. There's no urgency here. No need to prove. No need to perform. And that's new. Because this time, you're not reaching for connection to fill a gap. You're not seeking validation or reassurance or distraction. You're already whole. And that changes everything. You've learned what it costs you to abandon your inner world just to keep someone close. You've learned how much energy it takes to translate yourself to people who never intended to truly listen. So now, your heart responds differently. It doesn't open out of longing. It opens out of recognition. Let me ask you something softly. What if the reason this connection feels gentle is because it doesn't need anything from you? Because you don't need to be louder or smaller or easier to love. You don't need to impress. You don't need to explain your depth. You don't need to rush intimacy to make it real. This time, love doesn't arrive as intensity. It arrives as ease, as safety, as a sense of being met right where you are without adjustment. And that's the blessing here. Not romance for the sake of romance, but connection that honors your completeness, that respects your pace, that understands your quiet as communication, not distance. As this awareness settles, you may notice yourself breathing differently, more open, less guarded. Not because you're giving something away, but because you finally trust that you don't have to. And as we move forward, you'll begin to see how this kind of connection doesn't interrupt your life. It weaves into it naturally at the exact moment you're ready to receive without losing yourself. And somewhere inside that openness, something heavy quietly loosens its grip. You may not notice it all at once. There is no sound of breaking, no dramatic release. Just a strange lightness, as if a weight you forgot you were carrying has slowly slipped from your hands. This is how long-held blocks leave your life. They do not shatter, they dissolve. For a long time, certain areas felt strangely resistant. Effort met silence. Movement required twice the energy. Decisions came with an invisible cost. And yet, lately, the resistance feels thinner, not gone, but less solid. What once felt like a wall now feels more like fog. This isn't because circumstances suddenly became easier. It's because you changed in a way that made the block irrelevant. You see, Aquarius, some obstacles exist only because we keep carrying the identity that created them. And you are no longer that person. You have outgrown certain negotiations, certain compromises, certain patterns of responsibility that were never meant to be yours alone. So the block doesn't need to be pushed. It simply cannot stay. This may show up quietly. Paperwork moving without friction. A career decision becoming obvious instead of complicated. Family dynamics softening without explanation. Or an internal tension releasing as if your mind finally agrees with your heart. The most surprising part is how calm it feels. No rush of victory, no emotional surge, just clarity. Choices feel cleaner now. Not because there are fewer options, but because fewer of them require you to betray yourself. And that is a powerful shift. Let me ask you something, gently. What if the reason this block is dissolving is not because you tried harder, but because you finally stopped carrying what was never yours to hold? There is wisdom in that. And maturity. You no longer argue with reality. You listen to it. And when something no longer belongs in your life, you don't fight it, you step aside and let it pass. That's why this release feels light. That's why it feels clear, not empty. Free. You may notice your body responding first. A deeper breath, less tension in your shoulders, a sense that decisions do not need over-analysis anymore. This is not indifference. It is alignment. And alignment has a way of simplifying everything it touches. As this block fades, space opens. Not for chaos, but for movement that fits who you are now. Nothing has been taken from you. Something has been returned. Your energy, your authority, your ability to move forward without dragging the past behind you. And as we continue, you will begin to feel how this newfound clarity creates room for something that matches you precisely. Not something you have to struggle toward, but something that meets you with ease and stays. And in that new openness, something begins to appear on the horizon. Not as a challenge, not as a test, but as an invitation that feels strangely familiar. It does not rush toward you, it waits. You notice it because it does not demand that you bend. It does not ask you to hurry. It does not require you to explain who you are or justify why you move the way you do. It simply fits. For a long time, opportunities came with conditions. Unspoken ones. Be smaller, be more agreeable, be more like what they expected. And you learned how to adapt, how to make yourself workable, how to carry brilliance quietly so it would not make others uncomfortable. But something has changed now. You can feel it in your posture, in the way your spine no longer leans forward in anticipation, in the way your breath stays steady even when something new approaches. This opportunity does not arrive as pressure. It arrives as recognition. It meets you where you are, not where you used to be, and not where someone else thinks you should go next. There is no inner negotiation this time. No list of pros and cons. No subtle warning in your chest. Just a calm knowing. This does not cost you your values. It does not ask you to trade rest for success. It does not require you to dim your originality to be accepted. And that is how you know it is real. Aquarius, you only truly shine when you are allowed to be yourself without performance, without armor, without the need to prove your intelligence or your depth. This moment understands that. You may notice how different your response feels. Instead of hesitation, there is clarity. Instead of maybe later, there is a quiet yes that surprises even you. Not because you are impulsive, but because for once your inner world and the outer offer speak the same language. Let me ask you something softly. What if the reason this door opens so easily is because it was built for the person you are now, not the version you were trying to become? You are not stretching to reach it. You are not preparing yourself to be worthy. You already are, and that changes the entire experience. There is no need to push. No need to convince. No need to hold your breath while waiting for approval. The door opens because it recognizes you. You step forward without leaving parts of yourself behind. Your curiosity stays intact. Your integrity stays intact. Your quiet strength stays intact. And that is the real blessing here. Not opportunity alone, but opportunity that does not ask you to abandon yourself to receive it. As this settles in, you may feel a sense of calm confidence. Not excitement that burns fast, but certainty that lasts. This is what alignment feels like for you. Natural, unforced, clean. And as we move closer to the end of this journey, you will begin to understand why everything before this, the pauses, the protection, the release had to happen first. So that when this moment arrived, you would be ready to say yes without hesitation and without losing a single part of who you are. There is a quiet moment that comes after everything finally lines up. Not loud, not dramatic, just still. It feels like standing in the middle of a room after the music has faded and realizing your heart is calm, not because nothing happened, but because everything finally made sense. You might be wondering why so much arrived at once. Why the doors opened in clusters instead of one by one. Why relief, clarity, opportunity, alignment, and ease seem to recognize each other and walk in together. It is tempting to call it luck, but you know better than that. This was never random. What you are experiencing now is the echo of many quiet choices made when no one was watching. The nights you stayed honest even when it would have been easier to numb out. The moments you chose integrity over approval. The seasons when you stayed with yourself instead of abandoning who you were just to feel less alone. Aquarius, you did not arrive here by force. You arrived by fidelity to your own truth. You kept going without turning bitter. You adapted without losing your originality. You learned without hardening your heart. And that combination is rare. There is something powerful about a soul that refuses to quit and refuses to betray itself at the same time. Most people choose one or the other. You chose neither. That is why the timing feels intentional now. January 12 does not come in like a storm. It arrives like permission. Permission to stop bracing. Permission to stop explaining. Permission to stop asking yourself if you are ready. You have been ready, longer than you realize. The difference is not who you are today. It is what you are finally allowing yourself to receive without suspicion, without guilt, without the need to earn it twice. Let me ask you something gently. What if all of this came together now because you would have rejected it earlier thinking you had to suffer more to deserve ease? You see it differently now. You understand that growth does not always look like struggle. Sometimes it looks like alignment catching up with the person you quietly became. The blessings do not change you. They confirm you. They arrive because you stayed when things were quiet. Because you stayed when nothing was happening. Because you stayed loyal to your inner compass even when it pointed away from what everyone else wanted. That kind of consistency creates a frequency. And life responds to frequency. So if it feels like everything is happening at once, it is because the version of you who could hold it all has been here for a while. January 12 simply opens the gate. You walk through not as someone becoming new, but as someone finally stepping into visibility without losing depth. And as you move forward from here, there is no rush. No need to prove the moment is real. Just stay present. Stay honest. Stay yourself. Because that has always been the reason everything found its way to you at exactly the same time. And now, Aquarius, let everything settle for just a moment. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that feels full, like standing under a night sky and realizing it has been holding you the entire time. If something inside you feels calmer than it did before, trust that. If something inside you feels quietly stronger, trust that too. You were never meant to rush this moment. You were meant to arrive and recognize yourself here. What you have just listened to was not meant to convince you of anything. It was meant to remind you of what your soul already knew before life got loud. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are aligned. And alignment does not always feel explosive. Sometimes it feels like a deep exhale after holding your breath for years. If this message found you tonight, it is because you were ready to hear it, not as a prediction, but as a reflection. So let me ask you something real, not rhetorical, not scripted. What part of yourself are you finally willing to trust again? Because the moment you do, life does not argue with you. It responds. If you felt seen here, if you felt understood, if even one sentence landed softly in your chest, I invite you to stay connected. Leave a comment, not for me, but for the other Aquarius out there who might be listening, quietly wondering if they are the only one feeling this shift. Subscribe not out of habit, but as a promise to yourself that you will keep showing up for the next layer of your own becoming. And most importantly, trust yourself. Even when the path is not fully visible. Especially then. This is not the end of the story. It is the moment the story starts moving with you instead of against you. The journey continues. The next message is already forming. And when it arrives, you will recognize it the same way you recognize this one. Take care of your heart tonight. You have carried enough. I will meet you again right where the light gets a little clearer.